Welcome to Hope in the Face of Cancer, where we share real stories of courageous people and their cancer journey. Today, we are incredibly honored to have with us Dr. Katy Rezvani, Vice President and Head of the Institute for Cell Therapy Discovery and Innovation at MD Anderson Cancer Center. Dr. Rezvani is leading groundbreaking research in cell therapy that's changing the way we approach cancer treatment, offering new hope for patients who have run out of options. You may recognize Dr. Rezvani from her feature in our book, Hope in the Face of Cancer, where we shared her deeply inspiring journey from her childhood dreams of curing cancer to becoming a trailblazer in immunotherapy. Dr. Rezvani was also this year's keynote speaker at CanCare's Hope Survivorship Luncheon, where we shared deep insights into the future of cancer treatment and the innovations shaping that future. Her work in cell therapy has the potential to revolutionize cancer treatment, especially for those who have exhausted all conventional options. In today's conversation, we'll explore her inspiring journey, the advancements happening in cell therapy, and how these innovations are providing a brighter future for patients and their families. Dr. Rezvani, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you very much, Darcy. It's an honor to be here.
Well, it was so amazing to have you as our keynote speaker for our luncheon this year, and everyone afterward was just so inspired and hopeful for what's happening in the future of medicine and what you're doing. So I can't wait to explore that with our audience today. But I really want to start. You've got such a fascinating story, and your passion for medicine started at a very early age. In fact, you shared in the book about an entry into an early yearbook when you were 9 years old about you curing cancer. Take us back a little bit to your childhood and what really inspired this passion for medicine.
Yeah, thank you very much, Darcy. So, as you know, I was born in Iran before the revolution, and it's interesting because I wasn't actually around anyone with cancer. I didn't
Yeah.
have a loved one with a diagnosis of cancer. But I remember cancer always being a taboo word. People didn't
Mm.
speak about it. It was always kind of a hush hush when they did. There was always a sense of fear and hopelessness. And I think that's perhaps what was the driving force. Even as a child, I was wondering, why is this disease, why does it seem so unsolvable? Why is it such a scary subject? People are fearful of talking about it. And I think that perhaps that's what um, drove my curiosity and sense of wanting to make a difference. And that's what stayed at me. And that's why, as I mentioned in the book, I still have that little yearbook, one of the very few treasures that I brought with me when we escaped Iran after the revolution with my family. And then when I saw that entry, it kind of reminded me that I must have been like talking about it to my
Yeah.
friends, and I must have also stayed with them.
Oh, that's incredible. So tell us a little bit how your experience as a refugee shaped you. I mean, you fled Iran when you were a young girl to England. Tell us a little bit about that, how that kind of created some building blocks for you for your future.
Yeah, my father was in the army, in the Shah's army, and perhaps that also explains why I always like using military analogies when I
Yes.
talk about, immunotherapy. And I mean, of course, becoming a refugee shaped me profoundly. That's what, if you were to speak to any refugees, I think they would say to you, it's a life-changing event. It teaches you resilience, but
Yeah.
it also brings uh, insecurity with it. As an immigrant, you always feel like you have to prove yourself, and that nothing can be taken for granted, especially when you lose everything. That sense of insecurity, I think, stays with you for the rest of your lives.
Yeah.
But that insecurity also makes you work harder. At least it made me work harder. It gave me determination that I carried with me throughout my life and into science. So something positive certainly came out of it. And I learned very early on that persistence matters, especially
Yes.
when the path ahead is difficult.
Absolutely. So it was in your early days of medical school that immunology was really speaking to you. Tell us a little bit about, how you became, so focused that this may be my path.
Yeah, the immune system, it just felt very intuitive to me. Um, our immune system is incredibly complex, but somehow it all fits. You have these different cells with very specific roles, and they work together to fight external enemies such as viruses, bacteria, etc. And also internal enemies, cells that go rogue, such as cancer, whilst at the same time trying not to cause damage to the body itself. And this balance between this complexity and order, it just totally fascinated me. And what is interesting about the immune system is it's a system that continuously adapts, it remembers, it protects, and it all feels very natural. At least it felt very natural to me. And I wanted to understand it more and eventually use it for therapeutics. And that's really what I still remember, like even the first paper that I read back in the late 80s, which was talking about the idea of using the immune system to fight cancer. And at the time, that wasn't necessarily an accepted subject
Right.
within medicine, but it just felt so right. It just
Hmm.
made sense.
Yeah. Kind of knew that that was the right path for you because, yeah, and it's amazing how far we've come in the decades since then. And we'll talk a little bit about that. You talk about an aha moment that you experienced during your rotation on the stem cell transplant floor when you were studying. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so I was doing my hem-oncology fellowship in London at the Hammersmith Hospital, and then I was assigned to the stem cell transplant floor. And what struck me was seeing how stem cell transplantation or bone marrow transplantation actually works. It's not just because of the chemotherapy or radiation that patients receive, but also because of the immune system of the healthy stem cells that are given to the patient. We call this the graft versus leukemia or the graft versus tumor effect. And that was proof that immune cells of the healthy donor can recognize and fight cancer. So at the time, people were trying to reduce the intensity of the chemotherapy and drop the radiation as part of the preparatory regimen to try and lower the toxicity and harness the power of that graft versus leukemia or that graft versus tumor effect. But even with reduced intensity conditioning, we were seeing a lot of toxicities. And that's why that's when I was thinking, and many others really, what if we could isolate this graft versus tumor effect without all of the toxicity? What if you can use the power of the immune system to fight the cancer without having to introduce all the toxicities related to chemotherapy and radiation? And that was what led then to my path moving to the National Institutes of Health in Bethesda and then focusing all of my PhD and postdoctoral work on trying to understand the immune response against cancer and then trying to harness that therapeutically for treatment and cell therapy.
That's incredible. Cell therapy may be a new terminology for our listeners. So how would you, explain cell therapy to the sixth grader?
Okay, well, I'll try. But cell therapy is about using living immune cells as medicine. So I already mentioned how our
Yeah.
immune cells are these soldiers that we have in our body that protects us against infections, but also against cancers. So we can actually take immune cells, either from the patient or from a healthy donor. And what we can do is we can engineer them outside of the body and basically give them like a GPS system, like a cancer seeking system to help them better recognize cancer cells and kill those cancer cells. And so you can do all of this in the lab and then give it back to the patient, give these engineered cells back to the patient like a blood transfusion. And
Mhm.
these cells inside of the patient's body will grow, and then they go and seek out the cancer cells, killing them whilst completely ignoring healthy cells. So instead of relying on only drugs, we're using the body's own defense system as a treatment. And that's why sometimes you may hear people refer to cell therapy as living drugs.
Mm, okay, that makes a lot of sense, and so exciting. I can understand how you get so excited to get up and go to work every day with what you're doing. So, I mean, you've been focused on this for decades. What has been the most exciting things you've seen? I mean, looking back, the most exciting transformations that we've seen in cell therapy since you initially had that interest.
So CAR T cells really have changed cancer treatment. It's been a complete paradigm shift. CAR T cells have, and we currently have a number of FDA-approved CAR T cell products for blood cancers such as lymphoma, B-cell lymphomas, and multiple myeloma. So they're available. Um, but CAR T cells come with certain challenges, and these include side effects. So, side effects such as cytokine release syndrome, where patients can develop inflammation, high fevers, drop their blood pressure, neurotoxicities, etc. And that there are also delays in the manufacturing because each CAR T cell product is made for specific
Mm,
patient. So it often takes weeks to manufacture. And with that, there comes the challenge of really the costs of these therapies.
yeah.
So I really do think car engineering has resulted in a major advance in the field of cell therapies. Now, we started looking at it in a different way in that we used a different cell type called natural killer cells. Natural killer cells, which are again immune cells, part of our immune system. But these cells have the potential to be safer and they can be produced off the shelf, which means that they can be ready and available when a patient needs them. And now with new technologies like CRISPR engineering, we can engineer these cells with even more precision to have therapies that are even more potent and safer. So I think all of that together is making the field of cell therapy highly exciting for a researcher like me, but also potentially very um, um, promising for patients with cancer who have exhausted multiple different lines of treatment.
Oh, absolutely. It is so exciting. Can you paint a picture, maybe a particular case that you could use to, share with our listeners so they can kind of get this picture in their minds, maybe a particular patient that you can use to illustrate what you've been working on?
Absolutely. Um, I can think of a patient who received one of our cell therapies now around 6 or 7 years ago. He'd already um, um, had battled cancer for around 12 years, had
Wow.
been through 11 different lines of treatment. Um, and really, by the time he came to us, he had no options left. But thankfully, this patient is doing very well now. After his remission, actually, I received a note from his 8-year-old granddaughter thanking us for giving her grandpa back and for giving her mum her dad back, which is a
Ah,
very I mean, it's every time I think about it, really it brings tears to my eyes. And actually, I have that letter framed on my wall, and I see it every day.
yes.
And it grounds me and it reminds me that what we do doesn't just affect patients' lives, but it affects entire families and entire
Yeah.
groups of people who love one another. Yeah.
Oh, that's incredible. I can imagine that's a huge dose of inspiration each and every day. So, as you look to the future, I mean, you're already really shaping the transformation of cell therapy and, moving kind of from the CAR T cell focus to the natural killer cell focus. What do you see? I mean, when you think about 10 years from now, 20 years from now, how is medicine going to be different because of what you're doing every day?
I sincerely hope to see cell therapies become standard for more cancers, including solid tumors, um, and for off-the-shelf therapies to become more widely available so that we can reduce costs,
Yeah.
increase access, and reduce barriers for patients to gain access to these potentially life-saving therapies. At the moment, CAR T cells, as I mentioned, they're FDA approved for hematologic cancers. So getting them to start being effective for solid tumors, and by solid tumors, I mean pancreatic cancer, ovarian cancer, brain cancers like glioblastoma, breast cancer, colorectal cancer. These are much more challenging cancers, and that's partly because the cancer cells form barriers, and these barriers can be physical or chemical to protect themselves, camouflage themselves from cell therapies. But we are already beginning to see impact with cell therapies, and I think with advances that we're seeing in cell engineering, in the tools that are available, we will start seeing, I sincerely hope that we will start seeing very similar type of responses in at least some of these solid tumors. So I'm very hopeful, and this is what we are now putting all our focus on.
Making that transition to, focusing on the solid tumors. Okay, that
Exactly.
makes sense.
Exactly.
So, what role do and can patients play in advancing this research? And, I think as lay people, we often think that this is happening outside of us and it's not something we can influence. But what role can folks like me, or anyone facing cancer today do to really help advance what you're doing?
I think first and foremost, I want to say that receiving a diagnosis of cancer is earth-shattering, and it's really overwhelming for patients. And I think it's really important for patients to realize that there is hope. Every day breakthroughs are being made in the treatment of cancer, and that I want our patients to understand that we are fighting this disease with them. Every single one of us has been affected either directly
Yes.
by cancer or indirectly through a loved one who's had a diagnosis of cancer. And I am totally in awe of our patients who come and take part in our first in human trials. It is very scary to be told that this particular treatment has not been previously tested in patients, or only a couple of patients, a handful of patients have had these treatments. There's a lot of uncertainty
Yeah.
in taking part in these sorts of therapies, and also knowing that you may not personally benefit from this, but it could potentially benefit patients in the future. So I would like to again reiterate to our patients that you're not alone. There are teams of people working every day to improve treatments and create new options. There's genuine reason for hope.
Yeah.
And I believe that cell therapies will have huge impact in the field of medicine, together, of course, with other modalities. I'm not saying that cell therapies will replace chemotherapy or surgery or
Right.
radiation, but it's at least another option that will be available for patients with certain types of cancer.
What do you think the biggest barrier is to cell therapies becoming more accessible? Is it really more of a cost issue, or where does the struggle lie there?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think it's just different layers. As I mentioned, currently all the FDA approved CAR T cells and also T cell receptor engineered T cells and till tumor infiltrating lymphocytes for melanoma, they're all um, patient specific. So something that we call autologous. They're made from the patient for the patient.
Yeah,
So with that comes the problems of, okay, it takes often weeks to manufacture
yeah,
the product. Um, Many patients don't have the luxury of weeks to wait.
right.
Um, with that, there is also the incredible cost. The cost of these sorts of therapies is somewhere in the region of 400 to $700,000 for one
Mm,
treatment. Um, and then because of the toxicities related to CAR T cells and TCR T cells, these toxicities I mentioned, such as cytokine release syndrome, neurotoxicity, these therapies have to be administered in very specialized centers where you have access to an intensive care unit, you have access to neurologists, to cardiologists, etc. These are not therapies that can be administered easily in the outpatient setting. So as a result of that, patients have to commit to come to large centers, large cancer centers, such as MD Anderson, where I work. And for many patients, geographically,
mm,
finding a center that provides these therapies becomes obviously a challenge. So when you add all of that together, the toxicities of the drug, the financial toxicities related to the cost of therapy,
yeah.
um, the geographical barriers to gaining access to that. Um, Even in our country, only about 20 to 25% of patients who could benefit from the FDA approved CAR T products are gaining access.
Mm,
And so this is a bottleneck that I'm hoping that with the advent of these off-the-shelf therapies that are already manufactured, available off the shelf, sitting in a freezer, waiting to be thawed at a patient bedside with a potentially more favorable side effect profiles. NK cells so far have been safer. They don't cause the same degree of cytokine release syndrome and neurotoxicity as CAR T cells. But basically, the use of these off-the-shelf therapies could potentially then increase access for patients and then overcome the barriers that I just mentioned to you.
absolutely. So what is it going to take for us to be able to escalate the availability and access to natural killer cells? Because it sounds like, the more we can do that, the less these more expensive, harder to access treatments will be needed.
Yes, so that's an excellent question. And for that, of course, we need to do multi-center studies to demonstrate that the efficacy and the safety profile that we are seeing in our hands is being also observed with other teams, other groups. And there are a number of these multi-center studies that are currently ongoing with CAR NK cells, supported by different drug companies. At MD Anderson now, we're also working towards running some of these multi-center studies with our partners to make these therapies available to patients beyond our institution. Ultimately, these multi-center studies can then lead to FDA approval and getting the rights and the approval by FDA to kind of make this available to more patients. But there are regulatory steps that will need to
Yeah,
be yeah, fulfilled before we get to that stage. Again, I'm hopeful that in the next 3 years or so, we're going to be in a position where we will have an FDA approved CAR NK cell product that will be available for patients.
Oh, that would be so exciting. Well, another exciting area that I know you're very familiar with in your day-to-day work is how AI is really shaping cancer treatment. Tell us what that looks like for you. How are you utilizing AI on a day-to-day basis to help your patients?
So at MD Anderson, we're very fortunate. We have an institute dedicated to data science,
Mm.
and and they use machine learning, artificial intelligence for analysis of very large data sets. So for us in the field of cell therapy, AI can help us analyze the enormous amounts of biological data that we collect from each of the patients that are receiving our cell therapies and that are being enrolled in our trials. AI will allow us to identify patterns that may otherwise go unnoticed. Again, there's so much data that for a human being or for a group of human beings to cipher through could often take weeks, if not months, whereas AI can do that very, very rapidly. So we are working very closely with our Institute for Data Science in Oncology to feed the data that we are acquiring from all of our patients, again, to help us then design the next generation of cell therapies that are even more potent, more effective, safer for therapy of our patients. It's really also it's helping accelerate the pace of discovery for our patients in that respect.
That's so exciting. I would imagine when you look out at what's possible, it's super exciting. But then you look at the process that has to take place before you can get to that. How do you deal with just frustration, of like not being able to make any of this happen faster?
That's a great question. Of course, we want everything to happen faster. There are patients waiting every day.
Yes.
There are lives that are being lost to cancer. We have to be methodical. We have to be
Yes.
very precise. We have to be very careful. We work very closely with the FDA. Obviously, all of our clinical trials get a safe to proceed from FDA, and we want to move quickly with our therapies and with our innovation, but without compromising safety. But just to give you a bit of an idea, in the Institute for Cell Therapy Discovery and Innovation, from a concept, an idea, to starting a clinical trial, it only takes us around 15 months. We can do it in 12 to 15 months. So
Yes.
that's making sure that everything is done according to the regulatory processes that have been put in place by FDA. So we can be very fast in terms of also developing the next generation of cell therapies. Yes, but if I
That's
could do it in 18 days as opposed to 18 months, I'd be very, very
you
happy.
snap your
Uh,
fingers and make it
Exactly,
happen.
exactly.
So I certainly hear the hope that's, already here today, but coming even more so down the road. And like you said, ideally just a few years from now, these treatments are going to be so much more accessible, so much more affordable. For the person who's been diagnosed today, what message of hope would you want to leave with them today?
I think that I again, it's very overwhelming. I just had a very, very close friend of mine who just 2 weeks ago was diagnosed with
Mm,
ovarian cancer. So I feel the
yeah.
pain. I share that pain, and I think I'm relaying to you what I said to my friend is that um, we are all working towards the same goal,
Yes.
and that there is all across the world researchers, scientists, clinicians, nurses, everyone working together to find cures for cancers. Every day, new therapies are being developed, and as overwhelming as this could be, and as dark as those moments could be. I think it is important to keep that hope going.
Yes.
We had patients come to us to receive these therapies, patients who only had an option of either going to hospice or receiving our cell therapies. An example of a young man who, on the day he received his cells, his mom and dad who were in the room with him called for the chaplain to come in the room because they really thought that he was not going to make it.
Yeah.
3 days later, he was sitting up in bed playing Nintendo video games. And a week later, he was discharged from hospital. I mean, these are moments that we are seeing. And that's why this is exactly what I said to my best friend in the world. And I said to her, do not give up hope,
Yes.
because the pace of science and innovation is at an unprecedented rate now. And we just have to keep fighting. We have to keep
Yeah.
fighting cancer.
It's so exciting what you're doing, and I can't wait to watch the breakthroughs as they come through. And I think about people who are living with a stage 4 cancer diagnosis, especially, and looking at the prospect of the treatments that may be coming down the road, that can really change, the course of their life. And it's so exciting. And we are so grateful for what you do every day. And we are so grateful that you're out there fighting for everyone, touched by this disease. So I just want to say thank you on behalf of our entire community, um, not only for your diligence and your tenacity in the research lab, but for your heart as well. You care, and to see that combination of science and caring is beautiful. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Darcy. Appreciate it.
And thank you for joining us on this episode of Hope in the Face of Cancer. Please subscribe and stay in tune to future episodes. And if you or someone you love is facing cancer today, CanCare is here to support you. Go to cancare.org for support. Until next time, remember, there is always hope in the face of cancer. Thank you for joining us on this episode of Hope in the Face of Cancer, a survivor by your side. If you or someone you know is facing cancer or is supporting a loved one through their journey, we invite you to share this podcast. Thank you for your support in our efforts in the cancer community. No one should face cancer alone.